Welcome to the CultureLab. I'm your host, Bajer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It gives you the tools and inspiration to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. This is where we explore how to cultivate remarkable cultures that scale and evolve as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
And the more that we get into connecting and having people understand the relationship between exactly what they do, regardless of what level or situation, and advancing the purpose of that institution or that team, the more the work is considered to be meaningful, even indispensable.
Hey friends, welcome back to episode 118 of the CultureLab podcast. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind accelerator program where culture leaders get hands-on support and guidance on how to reach their goals faster, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. CultureBrained connects you with outstanding peers on the same journey, but also with world-class experts, including people you know from the show. And they all help you identify and implement new, better ways of creating a culture where people do their best work. Check it out at tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. And no need to write it down. There's a link in the show notes. For those of you who tune in regularly, you probably know that I'm big on understanding the idea of belonging. I keep circling back to it because my research shows it's a core piece of the puzzle for a great culture, along with fun and meaning. But here's the thing. We still have a lot to learn about belonging in the workplace. What I find is that a lot of people think of belonging as being accepted for who you are. And sure, that's definitely a part of it. But from what I've seen in my work, it's only just a start, a necessary but not sufficient condition for belonging. Belonging isn't just about being embraced for who you are now, but also for who you hope to be in the future. If you feel like you are only accepted if you stay the same and not if you want to change and grow, well, then you don't really belong. True belonging means knowing that we are okay as we are today and that we are supported in becoming who we want to be tomorrow, both as individuals and as a team. And for that, we need to feel safe enough to challenge the status quo and go after change. And with that in mind, I'm super excited to introduce you to my guest today, Lorne Rubis. Lorne's got more than 40 years of experience working on culture, leadership, and transformation in all sorts of roles and across different organizations in North America and in Europe. Nowadays, he gives advice to CEOs from those just starting up to those running big established companies. He also recently started Belongify, a company that's all about helping organizations move from just including people to really making them feel they belong. Check out the show notes to see all the impressive stuff that Lorne has done. In our chat today, we are going to dive into Lorne's project, the Belongify System, a tool he and his team designed to help leaders make their hybrid and remote teams work better by creating a culture of belonging. You'll hear about what Lorne thinks are the important parts of Belongify, and you'll definitely get some practical ideas for how to try them out with your own team. So let's get to it.
I'm Lorne Rubis. I'm a culture strategist. I wake up every day and think about how to contribute to advancing culture and leadership and to create places or help co-create places for people to thrive and contribute in the workplace. So I'm just delighted to be here, and I love your work, and it's an honor and a privilege to be part of the conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Lorne. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited about this conversation. We have a lot of common interests, so I'm sure that we will geek out on the topic
Yes, you will.
to our delight and hopefully our listeners' delight as well. Before we dive in, I have a question, and I ask this opening question to all of my guests actually. And it's about the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person. I'm curious for you to share a little bit with us. How did you grow up, and how did the culture that you had been immersed in as a kid influence who you are today?
So I grew up as a farm kid in central Alberta, Canada. Tells you a little bit about how old I am, but as I grew up, we were just very kind of poor farmers, and we didn't have any running water, no electricity. We lived on a quarter section of land. And so my very early days were really just out there living in that experience. And eventually, as my family migrated into the city in the 50s, then my experience ended up being growing up in the city of Edmonton, which is a fairly small city in Alberta. And there, my life was around sports. I played every sport. The cultural impact for me was understanding how teams worked from very early age around how teams became winning teams. I never thought about it consciously, but I became kind of an observer of that around what made a difference between winning teams and my impact on being able to be a leader inside of that environment, even in early age. And that influenced my whole life. When I graduated, I played college sports. I played what we call football here in Canada in college. And when I graduated, all I was going to be was just a jock. I was going to teach phys ed. I became a teacher, my first teaching job. And this was the biggest influence of all on me, Aga. I came to a school. The school was not doing very well. It was a junior high school and elementary. Morale was down. Their sports teams were poor. And my assignment was to teach physical education. I coached every team, boys and girls. And 4 years later, that school completely transformed. So now it was this combination of the faculty, the students, and the parents. But a school went from low morale, not a winning environment, to winning city championships, to academically improving, to this high spirit morale. The day I left, and this is a tribute to the kids, not me, but I want to share it in this context. It was the final day of a school. I was leaving to go to graduate school. And the kids, when they said goodbye, auditorium full, about 300 kids all stood up in their chairs and spontaneously and applauded. And I sat there on the stage like a big baby, kind of crying my eyes out. And I realized that while they were applauding part of this moment of saying goodbye to me, we were applauding each other for what we did in that 4 years, what we created. When I came home and I talked to my wife partner now of 52 years, I told her that this will change my life forever. It will never be the same. And that started me on a journey of pursuing what happened there. That was a cultural shift. What happened? What were the conditions? How did that occur? I wanted something like that to happen. I didn't do it on my own, but there was intentionality behind it. I wasn't conscious of it. I finished my graduate work and I went out into the business world. I became a CEO of a couple companies, blah, blah, blah. But my life has then been really, in the best way, haunted by this notion of creating conditions for people to feel like they want to stand in their chairs.
Creating conditions for people like they feel that they want to be standing in their chairs. I love that. And as you say, to be standing in their chairs, to applaud what they've been able to do together.
What they've been able to do together
as a team. Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
You know, I've had a reunion with those kids some 30 years later. Not all of them, of course, but a bunch of them organized a reunion. And we talked fondly with great memory. You know, the ages of 12 to 14, that is a kind of an unusual occurrence, my experience. So there's this lasting impact when something magical happens. And if we're in a position to have an impact, to create those conditions, then we do create a little bit of magic for a little bit of time. That is a remarkable privilege and opportunity.
It really is. And I think these are the moments that create the narratives of our lives, these highlights, these moments that we experienced that little bit of magic. So in a way, I think, as you say, it's a privilege to be able to contribute to that and help people create that narrative of their lives that is worth living, right? And I know that you've had decades of experience after that as senior executive and, as you've mentioned, as the CEO of multinational companies. So I'm sure that there have been many, many, many similar experiences, good ones, but also bad ones probably. So I want to dive straight into sort of the essence and the most important learnings for you in that experience and in your career. What is one lesson you learned throughout the decades of your career that you wish you knew early on, perhaps as that PE teacher, when it comes to creating the conditions that you described?
I have been struck by the power of this notion of connecting as human beings before we get into the content of what we have to do. And it took me many decades to really consciously have that ignited in a way that I fully understood. I'm not sure I completely do yet. Many things influence that. And, it seems so simple to say connect before content, but yet as human beings, we want so badly for the right reasons to be seen, to be recognized, to be appreciated, to be loved, really. And on the other hand, we have to also learn how to show up and to bring ourselves. And both of those, that dynamic is going on at the same time. And then leaders, and when I talk about leaders, I mean it in the broadest sense, that they are human beings that provide conditions for people to really want to show up and to be seen. And they see them. If I knew that more completely, I think earlier on, if I was more conscious of it, I think I'd be further advanced in knowing how to develop that and create that in everything I do more meaningfully, elegantly, maybe with some social science research behind it, and to bring that to the world in a more complete way. And I hope to hear a little bit more of that anyway.
Yeah. And now you are definitely incorporating it in the way you show up, because that has been my experience with you, that you do connect before content. And you are also the creator of a system that is called Belongify. And you've designed it to equip leaders to improve the performance of hybrid and remote teams by creating a culture of belonging. And connect is one of the elements. And I'd love for us to unpack it and talk a little bit more about why connecting and what it means. But before we go there, I have a couple of questions to set the context for what this system is. So the first question that I have is, why is belonging at the center of your work?
A couple things. One is I asked myself some questions around when I retired from corporate life, and I was thinking about, what's my practice going to be to go further into the world of culture and leadership. And I asked myself, well, as a CEO again, I asked an Aga question, what would be that one thing that I'd want to reinforce more richly and meaningfully on reflection? It was around belonging. And it was kind of interesting because, of course, there was at that time a little bit more of a resparkle around DE&I, which has been around for 25, 30 years, but not very much progress. In fact, people might argue we've regressed on it. But more complete thinkers on diversity, equity, inclusion know that the final piece is really belonging. In some ways, I don't think that work has been given as much attention in the workplace that it requires, because essentially, if every single person felt like they really belonged, that they could show up, the impact to an organization would be, and to the individuals there, would be quite remarkable, because you're then able to bring your complete self and to really bring the talents and the skills and the ideas that you have because you feel like you really belong. And so that was the essence around thinking if we could create that, then the impact, not only in terms of productivity, looking at it from an organization perspective, but from teamwork, looking at it from a team perspective, from an individual perspective, the mental wellness that goes with that, the sense of not perfect, the raw imperfection of belonging. But if we could create conditions for belonging, that would be something really important at every level. So I don't know if that kind of gets to the essence of, but I thought as a CEO, I'd want to ask myself, how do I create the condition for every single person, whether it was 10, 50, 50,000, that generally woke up more often than not and felt like they belong? And then what would that mean? And how to take that beyond just an emotional statement to a statement of practicality of something that was genuinely more just than, although the intent is important, but beyond the intent. So that was the thinking behind it.
Right. And I understand that you decided to break it down and identify what are the factors that contribute to cultivating a sense of belonging at work. And that's how the Belongify system came to life. Here's what I noticed about it, and I'm curious whether it was intentional or not. All of the elements of your system that we are going to discuss in detail and talk about the 6 elements that it consists of, all of the elements are verbs. And I'm curious, is there a reason why you chose verbs as the foundational elements of Belongify?
I think a lot of your listeners, or most of your listeners, probably are interested in are action-oriented people. And, there's so much verbiage out there, but really culture is what you do. And that's who you become. And so, yeah, there was intentionality behind the verb, trying to make it accessible that way as verbs. I appreciate you noticing that. We're still learning a lot about the system, but that seems to have resonated with people about making that accessible for them.
And so the first element is connect. And it seems to me, and also based on what you have mentioned earlier, like the foundational element in this whole system. Today and during our previous conversation as well, you really passionately emphasized its importance and you share this maxim, connect before content. Could you delve a little bit deeper into the essence of this principle for us?
Yeah. So the deeper and more complete part of the principle is that when you and I show up, that people know our story a little bit and that we create these bridges between each other. And I work from the belief that maybe a little bit naive, and I'm willing to accept that the more bridges that you and I have, the connections we have, the more we can walk across those bridges. Like we know that we have a historical background connected to Poland. I mean, that's between you and I. We have that bridge just because we know a little bit about each other's story. So we know other things about each other's stories. And that the more we know about those, then I think we could almost do anything because, we start to appreciate, I know you and you know me, and we have different skills and experiences and history, of course. And, we grew up on different sides of the world. But once we have these bridges, then you think about, well, how did that just practically translate into an organization? And at the most simple side, it's just the idea of checking in with each other before we dig in. Just check in before we dig in. That can be done in seconds. It doesn't need, but sometimes it requires minutes and sometimes it requires hours. What we're trying to ignite is both sides of the equation around, please take a moment to know that other person's story you're working with. But on the other hand, show up and be able to be vulnerable enough to share the story. And I say that with, the appropriate boundaries that are put in. But oftentimes, when we go through an experience of Connect Before Content, we get people to talk about their stories. We'll hear people say, I've worked with so and so for 15 years and did not know that. Or I will ask leaders, for example, I'll ask them in a bit of a provocative way. I say, okay, you all really believe that you know your team and you're very focused on getting to know your people. Please write down the names of the loved ones.
Or their dog.
And they can't do it.
Of course. Yeah.
I worked for a person directly, and God bless him. I think I worked for him for 8 years. I don't think he knew anything about. He did not know my family's name, and I won't say any more than that because I don't want to. It just wasn't in the lexicon, but we missed something because of that.
It's so true.
I'm not talking about crossing personal boundaries. I'm talking about something richer and more deeply. And the historic, when you look at it from a research point of view, the social science behind it, but if you look at it anthropologically from the communities that have been around for thousands of years, the more advanced way that they get to know each other is story. The story is a verb in sharing each other's stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We said that around campfires.
Yeah.
And connected and made meaning out of life as well together.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lorne, we're both mentors with Unreasonable, which is a really interesting organization. If our listeners want to check them out,
they're great.
it's Unreasonable Group. They're so great. And I know that we both have a favorite way to create and a favorite format to create space for sharing stories or digging deeper. Can you share what it is and how you use it in your work?
Yeah. And Unreasonable deserves a lot of credit for this because I richly experienced, as you did, at Unreasonable mentorship sessions and events. The takeoff on this is essentially bringing people together. And it's not very sophisticated, but it's so powerful. Is simply to bring people together and to put them in literal or virtual circle and to give them a dedicated space of just a couple of minutes without any judgment or application applied or feedback, and simply ask some rich or meaningful question, and have everybody put everything away and simply focus on that one person for those 2 to 3 minutes while they respond to that particular question. I have done that with all my clients. I do it when I teach my classes, my MBA classes. I kick off every session. I always do it with C-suite groups, and there's a little grumbling that goes on. You mean we're going to go and do this? Can't we just jump right in? We've given you more time than we wanted to anyway, blah, blah, blah. And I stop, and in circle, I put a question out there, and for 2 to 3 minutes, everybody focuses on everybody responding to that question. Something incredible happens at the end of every one of those sessions. I have literally, can tell you now, I have done literally 1,000 plus of those type sessions. I can say always there's something happens out of that conversation. And you can't do that all the time in every situation, but it's a very powerful tool. I wish everybody would use it. You might ask me the question, if I had my hands tied behind my back and a CEO said to me, please change my culture, and I only had one thing I could do, I know they would laugh me out of the room, but I would tell them, I want to take your entire organization and put them in groups of 20. And we're going to do storytelling for an hour. And I'm going to do that through your whole organization, whether it takes me 6 days or 6 months. And your organization will be profoundly different at the end of it in a positive, constructive way. And I know that doesn't fit any MBA class. It's got nothing to do with EBITDA or margins, but it's got everything to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've experienced the power of this as well. And if people want to learn more about a potential format, a Jeffersonian dinner, if you have more time, is a great format. But as you say, this can also be done in much shorter formats. I'm curious, Lorne, if you can share some of your favorite questions, because basically the idea with these sessions is that we throw a question out there and people respond. And as you say, the only rule really is that the person has a certain amount of uninterrupted time that they're allowed to talk without any questions, without any interruptions. What are your favorite prompts for these conversations?
I'm in the secret sauce world here, but I'm going to do it. Okay. My favorite question of all is, tell me a time in your personal and professional life when you've had a very difficult decision to make and how it's impacted you. Now, the interesting thing when you ask that question, it's my number one go-to question. When you ask the question, you'll see the little bit of shifting in shares. And the first consideration is how much do they want to share? That's going through their mind. The second question, that thing that's going through their mind, is, do they share the professional side or the personal side? And of course, this is not about trying to get everybody in a fetal position with a box of Kleenex in the middle of the room or anything like that. It's just about vulnerability and about all the stuff that Brene Brown writes about, and what happens in the group typically. And by the way, the one rule that I put in is the leader can't go first. The formal leader can't go first. Because if the formal leader responds with a thing, well, yeah, I remember how hard it was to decide whether I was going to be the CEO of this company or the CEO of that company. Well, then everybody else answers the question more along that lines. But typically what you find is that, you let people start, anybody can start, warm up often. Time is often a safer response. And about 3 or 4 people in, someone opens it up. There's a quiet in the room that if you could capture that air, you just feel a shift. And oftentimes it's personal, but not always. And again, you're not about wanting people to cross any personal boundaries. What happens, though, is that you create this connection, this bonding between the people in that group that is forever. That's why it's powerful.
It really is.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you.
One little simple thing. It's so crazy. Simple, but it's very powerful.
Simple and powerful. And yet sometimes it can be challenging. So I know that actually finding these moments to create genuine, authentic connection, especially during the workday, can be challenging. So we do realize that. But I hear you. What you're saying is that if you find a way to connect even briefly before content, it's going to have major positive impact on the content piece of the conversation as well. Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm mindful of the fact that we have 5 more really useful elements of your system. So let's keep moving. The second one that you talk about is contribute. And that's about being authentic, being vulnerable, challenging. Can you please elaborate? What is that all about? And how do we do that?
Yeah. So the credit to this is really Amy Edmondson's work and all the work that the pioneers in psychological safety have done. This is also a lot of self-reflection as well as hopefully a connection with social science. When I have been at my best and I've done my best work, I've been in an environment where I have this almost like superpower freedom to show up and to throw my ideas out and to be clumsy and to make mistakes and to think big. And when you consider what's required for that, you really need to have this notion of psychological safety in that group environment. And whether I've been working for a CEO or I've been on a team as a kid, when I go back to the early stories, the best teams, you show up. And, when you make a mistake, you come back to on the pitch or wherever, or you come back to an environment that is a learning environment. It may not be articulated that way, but it really is that. It's not a punishing environment. You feel bad enough yourself that you've let the team down or you've made a mistake. But when you come back and you're encouraged and it's about learning and you go out there and you show up twice as hard, because you never let your team down. So the conditions we talk about are to provide an opportunity for how to learn from mistakes and to be fast learners, because perfection is one of the really awkward and negative things in companies. when they talk about, because organizations, as you know, are quick to pick up the trendy words like we're a learning organization. But when you watch what happens when mistakes made, it's a punishing organization. It's a shame-based, blame-based organization, and it drives the culture down. The four conditions for belonging are really the conditions underlying psychological safety. We simplify it by learning fast from mistakes, from being able to have crunchy conversations that on a timely kind of way, which requires sometimes a little more work because oftentimes people don't know how to do that very well. The sneaky little other thing about the ability to ask for what you need and offer what you can. And then finally being able to not have to put any veneer on, that you can just show up in every part of this blessed way that we are created without putting a veneer on. There's no, you just there. And we work from the premise that your job is replaceable, but you are not. There's nobody like you and me. No one. So that's the essence under contribution. It's very, very easy for a team or an organization to make it unsafe. And it's usually not the egregious behavior. It's the raised eyebrow, it's the smirk, it's the put down, it's being put in a penalty box, it's the yellow card or red card.
Sometimes it's just even moving fast and pushing forward. I've noticed people sometimes want to contribute, want to raise concerns, but especially in fast growing organizations where the speed of growth and generally the speed of everything is really incredible and hard to keep up with. People might often feel like there is no space, there is no space to contribute.
No space, or we stop listening because we already know what Aga's going to say about us. Right? What does it matter anyway? We know where she's at it. And so, and then you decide, or I decide, why say anything? Because we're going so fast that I'm just going to jump in and carry on, even though I don't necessarily believe in it 100% or whatever.
Yeah, that's super important. And I love everything that you've said. And it seems to me that up until now, having talked about connect and contribute, it's all about creating an environment where people can feel seen, heard, and understood so that they then feel like they are also safe to learn and to contribute. And it makes me feel of a very useful model by Timothy Clark. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. I think he's, alongside Amy Edmondson, one of the leading experts when it comes to psychological safety. And he has this really interesting model with 4 levels of psychological safety. So we're going to put a link in the show notes for our listeners as well. And I have interviewed Tim on this podcast, so there will be a link to this interview as well if you want to have a listen.
I want to emphasize that the idea of going deeper into psychological safety is really important. We introduce it around Belongify System at an introductory level, but the best organizations, I think, are using people like Clark and other people to dig in deeper, more completely, and as part of their development process.
Yeah. So once we have created that space for people to contribute, you say it's time to clarify. I don't know if it's linear actually, but the third element in your system is clarify. What is that clarity about and why is it important?
So back to the notion of belonging and also looking at it from the angle of the organization. What I find that when you really feel like you belong, you're really meaningfully contributing to advancing the purpose, your purpose, the team purpose, and the organization purpose. And too often, it's so easy for organizations and individuals and teams even to get in transaction work. So everybody's exhausted, right? And part of the reason I think there's an exhaustion, and I don't want to oversimplify a complicated notion, but oftentimes when you go home and you feel like whatever going home means, you haven't created a lot of value and a lot of meaningful work, it's tiring in a negative way because you're spinning, you're running into all kinds of blockage, or you're just transacting. So you may have done hundreds of emails, one meeting after another, and you go home and consciously or unconsciously, there's this have I really done anything of value or meaningful? And the more that we get into connecting and having people understand the relationship between exactly what they do, regardless of what level or situation, and advancing the purpose of that institution or that team, the more the work is considered to be meaningful, even indispensable. And so to take some time to clarify, I think Brene Brown probably gets recognized for clarity is kindness or kindness is clarity. There's rich meaning and an undertone of good research underneath that. When you know, and I know, when we're working together, that what we do is so important and so meaningful and advances our purpose, and we depend on each other in the best sense of the word, then I think the richness of belonging increases. I go home thinking I matter.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me that we're approaching this topic from many different angles. But as you say, people like Brene Brown, like you, I've done some original research as well. And basically what we've done is we've asked now 3,000 people in scale ups to describe a period in the life where they did the best work of their careers, then analyze the data. That's how we landed on the 3 pillars of thriving cultures: fun, meaning, and belonging. And one of the things that everyone has said is that they could fulfill their goals and aspirations through their work, their personal goals and aspirations, but also they knew that they had significant impact on something and someone who matters to them. And it can be a colleague that they worked with and they simply experienced that the work that they were doing was important for this person. Or as you say, it can be a higher purpose, a bigger purpose, something that is simply bigger than us. And I think it appears over and over again. Seth Godin recently published a new book that is also based on some of his conversations with people. And he talks about significance and he refers to it this way. So it seems like it's a fundamental human need for us to have that sense that our life and our work matters.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious because you've had so much experience in so many different organizations. I would be curious to hear from you. How do you evaluate the extent to which organizations take advantage of that dynamic in a positive sense? I mean, take advantage. So tap into that power. And if not fully, then what stands in the way?
What stands in the way, I think, is a deep belief how important it is because, back to this warp speed thinking that happens in organizations is that we often want to, at the top of the organization in particular, know that that's checked. And the historical language has been legacy language of vision, mission, that we got that. It's in the website. It's on our t-shirts. And by the way, can't the communications department or the whatever group marketing, can't you do that on a weekend? Can't we get that done? And can't we do that in a workshop at the worst? However, tapping into the purpose, making that rich and alive, that's almost the hardest work in an organization. It is hard. And it's easy to do what and to do how, and frankly, strategy work, in my opinion, is much easier in some ways because we can put that work behind, market differentiation or, customer experience or you name it, the more advanced being done around. But deep purpose from the top of the house down to tapping into everybody that's involved and the other way, that is relentless, hard, continual work. There's a reason why millions of people have downloaded Cynic's Why video. I mean, how many 12 million people have seen that? And we need to know why. As human beings, we're just deeply curious about, I think, whether we do it intentionally or not, or consciously or not. And great leaders are always answering that question. by story, by example, they're relentless. It's never done.
I agree. And also what I notice is that great leaders create and design an environment where people can have an experience of their impact. So it's not just a narrative. It's not just something that you hear about from your leader, but it's actually something that you can experience
Yes.
on daily basis, ideally, right?
Yeah.
And that goes against this whole philosophy of industrial model where people are cogs in the machine and basically work is sliced up and you just do screwing the screws or whatever. And you don't really have an insight into how your work matters and why. So I think that it requires rethinking how we design jobs, even to a great extent, not just how we talk about these issues. And I feel like there is a great opportunity there to really think, right, is the way we've designed jobs in our organizations right now enabling that sense of connection to our purpose and a sense of meaning that people want to derive from work?
Yeah. And, I know this is a deeper concept and it's more complicated. However, I wonder one of the reasons why so many, what I would call traditionalist command and control CEOs, want everybody back in the workplace because they're comfortable with the industrial model.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the cubes, you're sitting there. And obviously, if you're sitting there and you're working, it's a historical derivative of the way we fractionalize the old industrial model. Shut up, turn the screws, do your work, go home, punch in, punch out. I can see you, you're working, we're productive. And that is not essentially where we are in this post knowledge economy, even. And it's not where we are, I think, the essence of human beings. It's not how we richly want to live. So, yes, I think we're designers. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think we love designs, systems and designs, because that design creates those conditions.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's shift gears and move to the next element because I think that's a very important one. Differentiate.
Yeah.
What is that about? You say that sameness is limiting.
Yeah, sameness, I think, is very limiting. And when I first started, we did a minimal viable product on Belongify. I tried to get rid of this one, and I got a lot of protest because this one was hard to do. But the idea of differentiate is to tap into the idea of being difference makers. There's one thing about part of creating this magic again of belonging is one thing that I contribute and I clarify, I contribute to purpose. But when you then do something that goes beyond that to be a difference maker and to differentiate, not just for the purpose of being different.
And now I'm understanding it and I'm loving it, Lorne. I was not entirely clear what you mean, but this is huge to me. I'll admit, I've never thought about this before.
It has been so interesting to watch when you ignite that opportunity because it starts to do things like create rituals. Like, when you think those rugby fans out there, and I maybe shouldn't refer to the sort of a more exclusive thing around sports, but as they do the haka, when the All Blacks do the haka at the beginning, that is a ritual. And it is part of their difference making. It is part of when you become an All Black. I'm really overextending the analogy here a little bit. However, this idea that I personally, so going back to the individual, no one is like me or you. No one. That you cannot create you or me. That's it. We're one and done. Yes, our jobs can be created. So if I get to come into an environment and going, that's the essence of what all of this deep primal cry for diversity, inclusion, and equity is being able to be there and showing up and to be accepted and to make a difference.
And to make a difference in a way, as you say, that only you can make, right? I think that's what has been so striking to me that, as you said, it's one thing to be able to do meaningful work and contribute to something important, but being able to contribute to something important in a way that only you can that takes it to a completely new level for me.
Yeah, and the language around reteaming that's happening out there, which I think is really quite important, is when you step back and look at it practically, people come and go from teams all the time. It just happened in regular occurrence. So essentially, every time you add a new dimension, whether it's a person or an activity, or that team becomes different. So this is a never-ending process of going through this process of connecting and contributing and clarifying and difference making. And a leader then, when a leader gets that, the formal leader does, and starts to make that happen as part of their ongoing way of leading, to my knowledge, no one is writing about it this way or doing it. I'm not a pioneer by any stretch of the imagination. It's Lego blocking a combination of things. I think something powerful happens.
Can you give us a few actionable insights or examples around how do you do that though? Because I can see a huge potential of this, but it's not clear to me yet what you can do to create that environment that creates that opportunity to differentiate.
I'm early days and I'm looking for better methodologies. But one methodology that I use is to have people picture coming together and winning an Academy Award or raising a trophy or being peer acknowledged as exceptionally inspirationally and different, and get people, what happened? Go on that stage. What happened? Now you're being interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, and I'm making corny, or the Economist
Yeah.
or whatever. What happened? What did your team? How did you become difference makers? And they get all fired up and excited, and even some of the most cynical.
Mm-hmm.
And they start describing what that could look like. And I know that's tried and true visioning, and people do it way better than me. But in my own clumsy way, when we do that, people start to describe this, and then in a more practical way go, well, what are some of the milestones or signposts or some of the ways we measure that? And then when you get into that, and then you start to say, what would there be some rituals about that? And without being over too complicated, once you start to define it, it starts to create momentum on its own. And people start to then identifying themselves as difference makers. They go, this internal audit team, as boring as internal audit may be, is magical and different. We do it differently.
Yeah.
We are not the same in a sense of, but when we do internal audit, we give our clients such an experience that they want us back. They don't look at, oh, that's internal audit coming, and boy, am I in trouble. I mean, that would be a practical example of sort of that team becoming difference makers. Like, let's bring in internal audit so that we can become better. So what does that mean as behavior as me as an internal auditor? And what does that look like?
I really love that. And we use a similar exercise where we ask teams to think that they are being featured on the cover of a magazine. What it sparked in me as you were describing your idea is that you can actually do the same thing with individuals on your team as well. So you can ask someone to basically think, how am I different as an individual? And what could be my unique contributions to our mission? I think that's a very interesting exercise as well, both to help people raise their self-awareness, because it kind of forces us to think in the context of this team, right? Thinking about my colleagues, how am I contributing in a unique way? And what would be the ways for me to truly unleash whatever potential I feel like I have to contribute even more in that unique way? There are a lot of possibilities there that you can play with.
One phrase that really irritates me as a chief people officer and CEO is performance management. And one of the reasons it irritates me is because oftentimes it's a bureaucratic exercise that is built around some rationalization that is there more for the HR community and for the legal community than it is for the human being. And oftentimes it's become around, really, if it's not articulated this way, it's about trying to make you the same as everybody else, as opposed to in difference making as a leader. I'm going, look, I know that Aga's never going to be, I'm making this up, super, super detailed on project work. That's not who she is. So I'm not going to ask her to get 100% better than that. But what she's genius at is igniting and creating space for people to think big. That's who she is. I'm going to tap into everything that's there and to make as much room for her to fill that space as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
For people like Strength Finder, people like Buckingham, Marcus Buckingham, that may be old news. But in organizations, and it's more than just the idea of, focusing on people's strengths. It's more than that. It's just that it's more an appreciation of the uniqueness of that particular individual and allowing room for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important thing. And definitely there's so much room for improvement for, I think, most teams around that, to really dig into who are we as an individual level and at a collective level, and how can we help everyone to bring their true full self to contribute to a common mission. So I love that piece. Let's talk about the final element, which is advance. What is that about, and how does it fit into the concept of belonging?
It's an extension well beyond continuous improvement. It's a kaleidoscope, tend to be perspective around we're going to get stuck. So let's be intentional about just recognize, what do we do when we're stuck? We're going to lose our way a little bit. What do we do when that happens? We're going to really see positive difference. How do we celebrate that? We wanted to give an experience that was quick and yet meaningful, but also clearly no promise of any kind of this one and done. You go through this process, you pay us, we give you this experience, and now you're, quote, fixed. And so what we want to do is we wanted to sort of open the valve in each of these areas, create this flow, and then invite the group to continue. But also to recognize, as the group changes, as people come and go, that this work is never ending work. And to think about allowing that to happen in a more sometimes formal way, but also informal way. And it's one of the reasons why we're now adding welcome and leaving to the mix. We haven't productized it yet. But for example, if you leave us, Aga, and we're a team, then we have to grieve on that, because we'll never be the same without you, ever. It just can't be. Now, I'm not talking about someone who does something egregiously bad and then leaving. It shouldn't be there just needs to be some, quote, literal severance. But we do leave so poorly. I'm talking about, you've been part of this for some period of time and you leave. And a lot of times people leave in the middle of the night. And I'm talking about both voluntary and involuntary. In either way, leaving is a vital part of belonging. And we have done such a poor job. And I'll say this from my own colleagues when I was the chief people officer. If I had a chance to do it over again, I would have made a massive improvement to the leave. The idea of giving you a really good severance package and feel okay because you're not going to sue me, that's not a great leave.
Yeah.
The idea that you've been around for 25 years and I give you a cake and a crystal, that's not a leave.
How would you envision a good way to do this? I'm really interested in this. And this is a very, very interesting perspective with which I wholeheartedly agree. These transitions are part of belonging and they're not done really well. But I don't think we have a lot of good role models. So anything really that you can share with us around how to do it better would be super useful.
One question is, how would you like to leave? Who would you like to say goodbye to? What would you like to leave with? What would you like to leave behind? How can we help that? Now, I'm talking about after a conversation where I've just asked you to leave. And people may not have a good appetite right then to do that. If it's dignified and if it's respectful, and there will be room for that. Allow that to happen. I know the IT security people are going to go insane when I say this, but you don't always have to cut everybody off the system right now. There are other things to do. I mean, you have friends that you've worked with for years or for months or for days. A lot of times people don't even know how to contact them or they're embarrassed. So one is just to have that conversation, and you can still do the legal and the other stuff and have the signings and all that. But there's a human being there that you could never replace. I know the cynics and the skeptics say, yeah, good riddance. They weren't a high performer. That is absolutely wrong-headed thinking. And if they were not really great contributors, then there's some soul searching needs to be done everywhere. The other side is this notion of the welcome. I'm not talking about orientation. I am a little bit, but not really. I'm talking about when you're welcome. Like when someone comes to your home, it's not like you're not there and they have to look around and see whether or
Or the guest book, handbook. Here is our guest handbook. Just read it. I'll see you in a week.
yeah. And when you talk to people about how they've been welcomed, it's embarrassing. Here we are in 2023. You will have, I'm not talking about just frontline people. This is a forum. I'm talking about, directors showing up and even knowing they're coming, or no consideration for, and if you just kind of step back for a minute, what's the first question someone asks you after your first day of the job? How did it go? What happened? So someone said, well, people didn't even know I was coming, and I had to go, and they didn't have my laptop, and that is the benign stuff. But when you're welcomed, that is a whole different experience. So the welcome and the leave are part of our belonging system. Just still trying to work on it.
I really love this idea of moments that matter when it comes to employee journey. And definitely onboarding and offboarding are one of those really incredibly important moments, and designing these moments in an intentional way so that the emotional impact that you want to have as a brand, as a culture, is the one that you would really like to have. And when we ask companies that we work with where they are now versus the desired impact, immediately they realize there's such a huge gap. So even just reflecting, how are we doing this today and what might the impact be versus what we would like it to be, can be very eye-opening. So thank you for raising this point. And of course, there are many other moments that matter like this, like, I don't know, a promotion or someone's family is getting bigger and they welcome a new family member, which is not part of the work stuff, but it's still very important for this person and stuff like that. I think there are so many opportunities that are being overlooked to create a sense of belonging in an organization. I wish we had more time, Lorne, to talk about these things, but I'm mindful of time. And I want us to shift gears. We have this section on the show that is called rapid fire questions. And the idea is I ask you 5 questions in rapid succession, and we set a timer, and you'll attempt to answer all 5 in under 2 minutes. So the first question I have is, at CultureBrained, the company that I run, we are on a mission to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. And because you are a person who is very much dedicated to creating more belonging in the workplace, you did mention already that if your hands were tied, you would make people connect better to create more belonging. What would be the second thing then? Your second advice, simple thing that people can do to increase a sense of belonging, maybe something that you haven't mentioned yet.
I want to do a double underline under welcome. I would take welcome to such a level that it would be almost ridiculous around how much I felt like I was welcomed into an organization or into a team, and also from the welcomer point of view.
Awesome. What are the signs that a company culture needs some work or perhaps even a major overhaul?
I use the lineup measure. When I'm going to a restaurant, walking by 2 restaurants, I'm hungry. one restaurant is full and people are lined up to the door, the next one's empty, I'm going to the lineup. And when no one is lined up to come to your organization and people are leaving your organization, that is a big, big sign to me. You got a problem.
Love it.
People should be lined up.
Yeah. Do you admire any companies for their culture?
Yes, there are lots of them. And of course, it's you have to look through a lens of the market, but you could take in North America, there in the Northeast, there's a grocery chain called Wegmans. People are insanely loyal to Wegmans. They're always in the top 10 in North America for their service experience. They have an emotional connection with their customers. So like when Buffalo New York had this massive snowstorm, anybody that could get out, they would make statements like, I had to go to Wegmans so I could just feel better.
Oh.
And not to buy groceries, but to feel better. Then you take a company like Cisco, they're a legacy company already. And I think in most great place to work or Glassdoor or comparably, they're like at the top of their culture game. They're 4.1, 4.2, 97% CEO approval rating, 97% recommend to a friend. And then there are kind of emerging organizations like Gainsight, where they're almost off the top on both Glassdoor and comparably. Like they're already got, I think, several thousand people. They've been at it for a little less than 10 years, but they got a 99% approval rating of the CEO. Their whole business is based on achieving financial success based on putting people first. And they declare it, they live it. And then I love organizations that have, when I was in Barcelona and we went to a little tapas bar and on there was 1931. It was full. Back to the lineup thing, could hardly get it. They've been at this since 1931. And it's not just location. It's not just the tapas. It's not the sangria. It's that one continual experience, connected system experience. There's an amusement park in Barcelona that's been around for over 100 years. I love these organizations. They're doing something right.
And if you were to recommend a book, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a book on leadership or on culture, it can be philosophy, mythology, anything really, a book that you believe, though, that could help our listeners to think about building a healthy culture differently and potentially better, what book would it be?
Can I give a couple chapters or parts in rapid fire? There's a classic, you got to hand it Daniel Coyle because he put a framework around the culture code. Good, wonderful. People like, Reid Hoffman has got a chapter for startups on, masters of scale. That's phenomenal. Or, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It's not like Nike's perfect by any stretch of the imagination there. In fact, they annoy me a lot, but his belief in purpose, the power of purpose, or Hubert Jolly's Heart of Business, goes into Best Buy, turns around a company that probably Amazon should have put out of business, and how he and his team tapped into purpose, personal purpose. There are a myriad of these. In my MBA culture class right now, I'm making him read Bonnie Gamis's book on lessons in chemistry, which is this very interesting book about what it was like to be a woman in the world of science in the 50s. Or the last class because of North America here, the book is called Five Little Indians. It was the award-winning book in Canada. I made him read that book to understand an Indigenous perspective of being sent to residential schools in Canada and what that was like in tearing apart a culture. If you want to read the cult of we or anything on Tyrannus, if you want bad examples.
There are plenty. And very educational, I agree.
Yes, and it's a combination of all those that I think give a richness to understanding what it really means to advance a culture, create conditions for people to thrive.
That's wonderful, Lorne. Thank you for this conversation. I truly enjoyed it. There is so much richness in your work. And I love the focus on belonging. Obviously, as you know, it's really important in our work as well. If our listeners want to learn more about you, about your work, if they want to connect with you, what would be the best online places for them to visit?
if you're interested in the belonging part, please come to belongify.com or drop me a note at lorne@belongify.com. If you're interested in the culture side of it, we have a boutique consulting firm called CultureGenics, where we do larger strategic work with select clients. And that's CultureGenics.com. And if you just want to get to know me personally, I'm very active on social media and all the thing, or LorneRubis.com on my website. Thank you for asking. And congratulations to you. I can hardly wait till your book comes out. It's going to be at the front end of my books that I will recommend. I know that for sure.
Thank you, Lorne.
Thank you for the impact that you've had at Unreasonable with their companies and elsewhere. It's pretty remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you for your work as well. It's always nice to connect with people who are doing similar work because it feels like we're really working towards the same mission. And so I'm grateful that our paths crossed and that we can work together, collaborate, think about these issues and make a difference, hopefully. So thank you again. Thank you for being on the show. And I'm looking forward to also bringing you at some point to our CultureBrained community where people who work on company culture in organizations look for new, better ways of cultivating company culture. So that's something that we need to put on our calendar as well.
Let's do that, Aga. Thank you so much. And thank you to your listeners for just hanging out with us. How great is that? Lucky us.
Lucky us. Thank you, everyone.
Bye for now.
I'm Aga Bajer, the creator and host of the CultureLab podcast. And this is the CultureLab team.
Anis El Nabarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for spending your time with Lorne and me on this episode of the CultureLab podcast. If you found this chat insightful, inspiring, or useful, and I'm guessing you did since you are still here, then I think you'll love the conversation I had with Dan Coyle. Lorne mentioned his work, and we got to talk with Dan Coyle some time ago about his recent book, The Culture Playbook. You can find that link in the show notes. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the follow button on the CultureLab podcast in your favorite listening app. And if you could do me a solid, take a few seconds to share this episode. Could be on social media, a text, an email, or even just with one other person. Just copy the link from your app and send it to a friend who's keen on finding fresh, practical ways to foster an awesome company culture. Ask them to give it a listen, then get together and chat about what you've both learned. Because when podcasts like this spark conversations, and those conversations turn into actions, well, that's when we start making real changes in the workplace together. And if you are looking to dig deeper into these topics and connect with others who are shaping the culture within their organizations, consider joining the CultureBrained community. It's a unique culture accelerator program and a global network of culture leaders who are all about shaping the future of work. To find out more, head over to tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. And there is a link in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser. agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the CultureLab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.